Good afternoon and welcome everybody. Welcome to Urban Regeneration or Regenerative Urbanism. My name is Jill Hannaford and I have the absolute pleasure of being the chair of the advisory board for the Henry Halloran Urban and Regional Research Initiative. It's great that you could all be here today with us, and I'd like to start by acknowledging that we're on the traditional lands of the Gadigal people and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and thank them for their continuing contribution to culture and to care of country. I'd also like to pay my respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are here today. The Henry Halloran Urban and Regional Research Initiative was established by the University of Sydney in 2013, and many of you are regulars at these events, so you probably know a little bit about the initiative. But it honours the work of Henry Halloran, an advocate for urban planning in the first half of the 20th century. Our goal is to promote scholarship through collaboration and multidisciplinary and industry research. And lots of that work is on evidence today and over the course of the festival. The festival is going from earlier this week to the 20th of October around Australia, and in Sydney it will finish up on the 2nd of October, and I'm sure some of you have registered for multiple events. Why are we having a festival on regenerative urbanism? It's really about transforming spaces for people and the planet through holistic action for system change. And in an era of polycrisis defined by climate threat, social inequality, biodiversity loss, we must really rethink our systems for food, energy, water, waste, transport, land and housing. A regenerative paradigm that needs to heal, restore, renew and revitalise ecosystems. I'm delighted today to introduce Alex O'Mara, who is going to chair this session for us. Alex is the Professor of Practice in Urbanism at the University of Sydney, and she's a director of many other organisations and has a long history in working in the urban field. So Alex will chair the session and introduce our panellists. Thank you very much, Alex.
Thanks, Jill. Welcome, everybody. I'd like to acknowledge that my feet are on Gadigal country and pay respects to elders past and present, and extend that respect to First Nations leaders with us today. Regenerative urbanism is the theme of the festival this year, and today, urban regeneration. We know it gets a bad rap from some people, Jane Jacobs among them. We know there have been some heavy-handed attempts to regenerate places in ways that don't respect or which disrupt community. We also know that we don't have enough housing to house the people who want to live in Sydney, who want to live in places around Australia. Can't hear me? Can you hear me now? Better? We have huge waiting lists for social and affordable housing. We have a productivity commissioner talking about a city without grandchildren. So huge pressure on government to respond to that challenge around housing affordability, but not at the expense, I think, of green and public space where people connect with country, with nature and with each other, where communities build resilience, spaces that support our health and well-being, the health of our planet, good design, access to transport infrastructure and services. So it's not about preserving our places in aspect, but it's about understanding what's precious about our places and moving to a genuinely regenerative form of urbanism. That's all I'm going to say on the subject, because you have 4 fantastic speakers here today who are going to talk to you about that, and also some absolutely fantastic questions from the audience. It was hard to pick, there were so many, and we will have an open mic at the end, so if anything occurs to you while you're hearing from these brilliant people, you'll have a chance to ask those questions. I'm going to introduce them all to you, and then you'll hear from each one, and then we'll have a discussion. So firstly, Alistair Sisson, is that right? From Macquarie Uni. He's a research fellow in the School of Communication, Society and Culture, interested in the dynamics of housing and economic policy, urban planning and equality. His doctoral research examined the politics of public housing policy in Australia, with a focus on estate redevelopment and Waterloo in particular, and his current project is focused on the politics of housing data. Sounds fascinating. Professor Louise Crabtree Hayes is a geographer and professorial research fellow at WSU's Institute for Culture and Society. Recognising the role of property in colonisation and unsustainability, she works across social and ecological regeneration, led the creation of the Australian Community Land Trust Manual, and is doing a lot of work around Australia's affordable rental housing cooperatives in partnership with providers and member tenants. Carolyn Pidcock is a highly regarded architect, board director, change maker, committed to ideas that restore and regenerate people, place and planet, bringing 30 years of leadership experience across professional not-for-profit governance and advocacy. And finally, Emily Rowland, community and storytelling lead at Regen Sydney. Really looking forward to hearing about that. She's the community and storytelling lead, a civic platform reimagining how cities can thrive within ecological and social limits. And for such a, for a young person, pretty amazing CV. She was a founding member of Climate Action Week Sydney, and her ocean advocacy as part of the New South Wales Sanctuary Alliance Steering Committee earned her the 2025 Valerie Taylor Ocean Prize for Youth Action at for the Ocean Blue World. So, yeah, what a stellar panel. So enough from me. Can I invite the panel up to the stage, and then we're going to hear first from Alistair. Oh, sure, yeah. You see they're going to be trouble.
How's this volume? Can you hear me okay? Oh. So I've been asked to provide a bit of the kind of negative, doomer, critical geographer perspective on urban regeneration. I first want to thank the Henry Halloran Initiative and the festival for the invitation to speak here, and also acknowledge the Gadigal people and their elders past and present, whose sovereignty, of course, over this country was never ceded. And so as part of providing that perspective, I've been asked to give a bit of an initial definition of urban regeneration. And it's, of course, a term on which there are many contested definitions, and it's often used interchangeably with words like renewal or redevelopment. But I think regeneration in particular suggests a kind of more than just physical transformation, but also a social and economic upgrading as well. It's a highly contentious term and highly contentious process because of its track record of displacement and other negative impacts on poor and often highly racialised communities. Alex referenced in her introductory remarks. So historically, regeneration has been focused on places seen as blighted, whether those places are so-called slums in the early 20th century, so-called brownfield declining industrial areas in the late 20th century, or mid-century public housing estates that indeed replaced a lot of those slums in the 1950s and 60s. So the image on your slide here is the Pruitt-Igoe public housing projects in St. Louis, Missouri. I could have chosen many different examples, but this is probably the most notorious example of urban regeneration. It was a project, or it's two projects that were completed in 1955 as part of slum clearance. And the 33 high-rises that were built there lasted less than 20 years before they were demolished in quite spectacular fashion, having come to be seen by policy makers and politicians as a failure. And it was later, and is still, being transformed into a range of different uses, a primary school, office buildings, so on and so forth. So the architectural critic Charles Jenks said that the demolition of Pruitt-Igoe symbolised, and I quote, the death of modern architecture. Geographer David Harvey said it was not a bad date for symbolising all kinds of other transitions in the political economy of advanced capitalism. So urban generation since Pruitt-Igoe has been increasingly market-led and increasingly revolved around areas where low-cost housing and industrial land might be converted to higher and better use or more profitable use. So, we've certainly seen our fair share of that kind of urban regeneration in Sydney over the last few decades. And when I was walking here, I could see Barangaroo in the to the north, I could see Central Park to the east. But what I wanted to focus on in the few minutes I have here is the Waterloo estate. So this is a 2012 home estate just down the road past Redfern. And in the last 10 years, it's been through a very long and complicated process of consultation, planning, and now relocation of the first couple of hundred residents who are going to make way so that the first few hundred homes can be demolished. Ultimately, 749 homes in Waterloo South, which is everything besides the high-rises, so the buildings you can see in the foreground of this image, will be demolished to make way for just over 3,000 homes, half of them private dwellings, a third of them social housing, and a fifth of them affordable housing. So the reason I bring up Waterloo is because I want to talk about the need to apply a justice lens to urban regeneration. Justice is another one of those terms with a lot of varied and contested definitions, but I want to draw in particular on the philosopher Nancy Fraser, who argues that we should think about justice in terms of both the distribution of benefits and harms, but also the recognition of the experiences, ontologies, and aspirations of different groups, particularly groups who are marginalised in society. Sadly, the regeneration of the Waterloo estate fails on both scores. So despite many years of consultation, years of anxious waiting for the community there, tenants have had few substantive opportunities to shape the future of their community. They were told from the outset that there were quote unquote non-negotiables that included the tenure mix, so social housing could not exceed 30% of the redeveloped estate, and it included density. The estate needed to at least triple in density. So these fundamental parameters really shaped almost every other aspect of the project and undermined any kind of meaningful opportunities for recognition through the consultation and engagement process. And few of the tenants who live in Waterloo now will be able to enjoy any benefits of regeneration in the future. So they're told that they have a right to return, but the project will take, well, in this first stage, a decade or more, and many of those tenants are elderly. And for various reasons, the ones who are relocated are unlikely to return based on experience of previous estate regeneration projects. So we've seen in 3 recently redeveloped estates in Victoria, just 14% of tenants moved back into those areas, and in the Ivanhoe estate in Macquarie Park in Sydney, just 11% when the first stage was completed a few years ago. So these residents are in many ways bearing the harms of regeneration without receiving any of the benefits. Those benefits are instead distributed amongst future residents and property owners. There are, of course, alternative ways of doing urban regeneration, and we're going to hear a lot more about those in a moment. But one that I wanted to briefly mention is refurbishing and retrofitting existing buildings. And I was lucky enough to be part of a project that looked at the viability of this approach for the towers and the slab buildings in Waterloo North and Central over the last year or so, that was led by the non-profit architecture firm Office. After speaking with residents to understand what they liked and what they didn't like about their homes and their estate, we developed a proposal for upgrading existing buildings to provide a better standard of living. And the design proposal, that I can't really take any credit for not being an architect, but would reduce tenants' energy consumption and costs by 83%, would add floor space to the small studio apartments in the 2 towers you can see on the slide, and would also make homes and buildings more accessible. It would also involve building new infill housing, which you can see as well, which would allow regeneration to occur without displacing incumbent residents. So our retain, repair, reinvest strategy for Waterloo it's obviously socially and ecologically better. It's also significantly cheaper than the cost of demolition and relocations. So this research, responds to the particular site and circumstances of Waterloo, but I think that there are broader lessons that can be applied to urban regeneration everywhere. And not only public housing estates, but all forms of urban regeneration, as we're sort of on the cusp of a new wave in Sydney in particular. So public housing estates, Todd's in Western Sydney, even Wallara Station, in all cases we need to be thinking about regeneration through a justice lens. Justice in terms of recognition, asking how can regeneration meaningfully respond to the experiences, aspirations and needs of marginalised communities. And also justice in terms of the distribution of the material benefits of regeneration, including preventing or at least mitigating gentrification and displacement, and redistributing the massive windfall gains that landowners stand to reap from some of these reforms. So thank you very much. I look forward to the next speakers.
Thank you, Alistair. We're now going to hear from Professor Louise Crabtree-Hayes.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for the invite as well to take part in this. And I also want to acknowledge that we are on Gadigal country. So I'm going to do a bit of a tear through some conceptual stuff, but get to some practical things which can show you how we can actually talk about regenerative urbanism. So very quickly, I'll be doing why regen. We're going to get a crash course in resilience theory and its relevance to the space. And then a bit of what this looks like and some examples. So why regen? For those of you who haven't seen the scary picture, we've now breached 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries. So we're operating beyond the capacity of the planet to sustain life in ways that we understand it. So what this means is that low or no impact is no longer good enough. We have to be actively getting ourselves back within these boundaries. So that means we have to be doing things that are actively improving the situation. And so that's where these regenerative approaches come in. You can see on the graph here on the right, traditional practices have been realised to be degenerating. They actually adversely impact our systems. They reduce the capacity of the systems of the planet to sustain us. So on the right, what we're moving towards is now things that are actively making things better, actively sucking down more carbon than they're reducing, than they're producing, those sorts of things. And really thinking systemically and in the whole systems way, which is why a lot of work from resilience theory has been picked up in this space. So these are integrative approaches and very much based in systems thinking. So the relevance of resilience theory, and you can, if you really want to nerd out, you can look up things like adaptive co-management or complex adaptive systems theories. There's lots of wonderful things in there about how we actually have got millennia of knowledge of how to live in complex systems. So it's really rediscovering that knowledge. And it's really showing that resilient systems are those that draw on and combine different knowledge practices and bases, because the core aspiration is for the system to be able to respond creatively to shock or surprise. And so you need latent capacities in your system that you might not know are there, and you might not even know you need until the system is under pressure. And so you need different ways of understanding the world to be able to respond effectively. So we need collaboration between people with diverse knowledges. So it really comes down to multi-stakeholder structures and processes. I came into this as an ecology, formerly nearly a vet, and I've wound up working in governance and property law because it's all about this encoding of knowledge systems. I never thought I would end up here. But the key thing in all of these systems is trust, participation, and the ability to receive, understand, and respond to information. So when people tell you, hey, the system is doing this, you need to be able to go, oh, okay, we know what that means and we can respond to it effectively. So we really need ongoing channels of communication and iterative learning. These are absolutely key if we're thinking about responding well to stress and uncertainty. So what does this look like in terms of urbanism? Basically, organisational forms that include diverse stakeholders and enable their genuine input into a shared vision. So contra the example that Alistair was just giving us from Redfern Waterloo, actually thinking about how do we create structures whereby people can have a voice and for that to actually be meaningful and to translate into different outcomes than might have originally been proposed. So this is why I wound up doing way too much law, is because I ended up looking at things like cooperatives and other forms with memberships and boards that include and combine the knowledge of residents, broader community, public representatives, and bringing those voices into genuine ongoing dialogue that actually has power. So I do a lot of work on community land trusts as a result of that. You can see their classic 3-part board structure, but it's really about balancing these voices and bringing them together, and also so that no one power base can dominate the conversation. So the NIMBYs can't win, the YIMBYs can't win. It's not about win-lose, it's actually about a constructive dialogue on an ongoing basis. This is one of my favourite photos. It's the Dudley Street Neighbourhood Board. They have 34 board members and a voting membership of over 2,000 people. They have the power of veto over development on any block of land held by the city in a 40-hectare area of Boston, and they haven't blocked a single DA because their vision for the region has actually been adopted by the city. So it's an extraordinary example of genuinely participatory planning. So as a result, you see very diverse, flexible and place-specific programs. All these photos are things that are done on land that's permanently locked out of the market and held in community hands. So this is all what's been enabled through these sorts of structures. So for example, the Community Land Trust, they'll do a range of permanently affordable ownership and rental models, diverse prices, diverse incomes, diverse designs, but also non-resi, they'll combine resi with non-resi, so commercial and non-profit uses and developments on the land as well as the housing. And all of that is stewarded in perpetuity through that multi-stakeholder board. And so they'll say things like anything you can do on land, you can do on CLT. So this is the fun part. This is where we get into the actual real stuff. So I know this isn't urban. This is the Isle of Egg in Scotland, but I had to have the picture of the cow with the wind tower. I just couldn't resist. We needed more mist, absolutely. So this island was bought by the community from an absentee landlord who basically used to just go up there and shoot pheasants. So they did a fundraiser, I think it was global. They raised £1.5 million, bought their island back. They set up a trust that now has 3 subsidiary companies. One of them runs the renewables, one of them does the island shop, the post office, the tea room and the craft shop. One of them's refurbing the houses and does repairs and infrastructure. And this one I love. They've got a shared equity scheme called Egg Roll. Love the Scottish, culinary humour. And that's at a permanently affordable ownership model for residents to actually be able to live on the land. And we're seeing the return of traditional crofting practices as a result of these sorts of interventions. But getting back to Dudley Street, love these guys. I seriously suggest you look them up. So they've got a CLT as their developer arm. So the big parent organisation is 2,000 people, board of 34. They set up a CLT that's built its own housing and overseen things on the city land, 225 units of permanently affordable homes, but they've overseen more than 1,300 local DAs, but they haven't blocked a single one of them. And that's because, as I said, their vision for the area has been adopted by the city. And this is really important for us. They talk about development without displacement, which I think is the key thing for us here. So CLTs are popping up everywhere, which is exciting, including here. So what are we seeing in Australia? We've done research looking at what happens when people have a say in their housing. So this was work that we did on co-ops, showing this feedback loop between empowerment, participation, housing outcomes, but even things like their kids' wellbeing, their performance at school, and this excellent sort of feedback loop with this sense of voice, agency and empowerment really at the centre of it. And we're seeing the growth of CLTs, including prioritisation of country in that. So let's wrap it up. Regenerative urbanism is possible and it's happening. Regardless of the urban form outcomes, building adaptive co-management structures builds resilience and adaptive capacity. It just builds all of that social capital and all of that capacity to respond to things. People and local lived knowledges are vital to regeneration. We just can't, this can't be a physical thing. It's about people, as Alistair was saying as well. And particularly the resilience and the regenerative capacity might not be where you expect them to be. We might think we know who the experts are, but so often we just don't. And you just have to have a forum where people can genuinely have input and have a say in what's going on in their communities. So that's me done.
Oh, fascinating. Thank you for that, Louise. And now I'm going to welcome Caroline.
Oops, I'm hoping my slides miraculously turn up. Great, terrific, okay. I too would like to acknowledge that we are the luckiest people in the world to live on the land of the longest continuing culture, and imagine if we had have bothered asking our traditional custodians, how do we live better in this place? And whilst we haven't much in the past, we very much do have the opportunity and future, because I think what's happening now isn't really working, and I think we need to, the definition of madness is to keep on doing what you've always done and get a different result, which we won't. Who am I? I was a whole bunch of things, but I was born in Grafton, I was raised in Sydney, and I currently live partly in Sydney and Dungog, moving our base to Dungog. Rivers have shaped me, and I acknowledge that, and that's where I do. So urban regeneration, or, what does good look, feel and be like? I think if we go to Robin Wall-Cameron, who is a favourite, I think the really big thing is reconnecting with nature. Begins with seeing the natural world not as a collection of resources to exploit, but as a community of relatives to cherish. And I think that mindset change is really, really important. I think I've been trying to work out, how do you change people's minds? How do you change the way people think? And I've been developing this idea of handprints of good design, because footprints measure the negative stuff you do in the world, and handprints measure the good things you do in the world. So rather than keeping on focusing on how to reduce your footprints, how to do less bad, I think it's time to focus on handprints. How do you do more good in every single action that you have? And it's been, I suppose, I've been developing this. It's also been informed by people like Tyson Younger-Porter, and the fact that oral cultures use a hand. It's transportable, it's easy to remember. There are 5 fingers, there's 3 knuckles on each finger, and you can easily kind of bring this to mind. Plus also, I think, a whole lot of other people who I will refer to. But basically the handprints ask, how can we, our projects, our places, bring our story of place to life? How can we celebrate resourcefulness? How can we enable communities to thrive? How can we foster the long now approach of good ancestors? And how can we inspire and enable capacity and agency? And I think also part of this is breaking away from the tick boxing left side of the brain, which sort of separates things into different things, and trying to get into a more creative way of systems thinking in the right side of the brain, of bringing these things in their messy cross connections. So bringing the story of place to life is, every single site is different, every single place is different, and it has its own unique sense of who it is, and it is a who, not a what. And I think that, part of this is, how do we centre country in design? How do we enhance its context, connections and culture? And how do we positively contribute to its watershed? And every decision we make, we can ask these questions, and whilst we might not be able to positively address them all, we can try, we can start. What if we could? The second one is in celebrating resourcefulness. Let's stop building carbon-intensive, wasteful buildings and places. Let's really celebrate when we're smart and reducing those things. How do we achieve zero carbon in its lifestyle? How do we incorporate lean design for optimal resource use? And how do we enhance and balance the economic measures of cost and value? The third one is in enabling communities to thrive. How does our work approach all the communities? And I think we should be, this has been mainly written with human communities in mind, but I think all of nature communities should be included in this. And how do we improve physical and psychological health and well-being? How do we provide equitable and affordable access to resources and diverse communities? And how do we empower community members to realise their potential and flourish? So if we're building anything in a place, how do we look around and go, well, who else can benefit from this? Who else, what local trades and materials and systems and services can we use in this building, both in its building of and running of, so that there's a whole bunch of people who then, parts of the system, who then flourish. Dominic Hess has this definition of what is regenerative, what is regeneration, and you can teach a person to fish and they and their family will eat for a day. You can teach a person, you can give them a fish and they'll eat for a day. You can teach them to fish and they'll eat for a lifetime. But you can teach them to love the ocean, and together they will all thrive forevermore, because they actually have a relationship with each other and understand that the mutual co-evolving benefits to all are equally important for all of them. Fourth, in fostering long now approach of our good ancestors, how does our work do that? So, we are living in a very small time frame. I think it's about 1 or 2 seconds to midnight in the whole frame of the world. So think about all that has gone before us and hopefully what will go in front of us, and realise that our decisions aren't just for now, they should have a bigger time frame. Good Ancestors, there's a book written by Ronan Kranowski, who grew up in Turramurra and is married to Kate Rayworth of Donut Economic fame. And he talks about, and I think it's a beautiful thing for us to think about. So how do we respect and value the communities and buildings and actually materials of the past? How do we understand what's coming, change is coming in both how we use our buildings and the climates that we're going to be facing, and enable those adaptations to happen easily? And how do we regenerate resources as we use them? Water, power, food. I hate the word waste because they're just resources looking for their next life. And finally, in inspiring and enabling capacity and agency, how does our work sort of really help people understand what is possible and be inspired to do more, be enabled to do more? How do we provide the shoulders upon which others will stand? How do we help people understand and want to be in relation to and care for country? Because I think that's part of the fundamental shift that Robin Wall-Kimmerer mentioned and many others. And how do we support and promote healthy and fair supply chains? Most importantly, how do we inspire with stories that help us and others in our work to come? Because I think that we can shape what we do and how we tell about it in ways that give stop harbouring and holding information, but giving it away and in ways that people want to take it on. So just to finish, this is another quote from Robin Wall-Kimmerer, and I think that basically each of us can choose the pathway of honourable consumption, of living with gratitude and reciprocity, and thereby create a transformative movement. That I think that's what we need. Not more policy, not more data, not more money, but a change of heart. So I think I will leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Caroline. And on storytelling, we're going to go to Emily.
Thanks for that, and thanks for the applause from before. I too would like to acknowledge that we are on Gadigal people country. I want to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Sovereignty was never ceded, and at Regen Sydney we recognise the law, the story, the wisdom on this land, and regeneration is just one way that we can honour the plural ways of knowing. So I also want to thank everyone that are sharing their insights from justice, from governance, and Caroline, what you were sharing was so beautiful, and I feel that's pretty resonant to what I'm going to share. If you didn't know regeneration before, you'll definitely know by the end of today. I'll briefly describe what regeneration is from the trajectory of ecological design. Basically, what we don't want is degeneration that takes away from what is happening, and then the step above that is sustainability, but there's some contestation there where we're trying to go back to something before, but what is it that we're trying to go back from? So sustainability, a step from that is restoration, and that's repairing the damage, but regeneration takes it one step further. It brings in ecology and society, and it is also a whole systems approach, so you can see regeneration from different perspectives, and yeah, it's just what we need to go to. So with that in mind, we can look at it from Kate Rayworth's framework of the donut economics. And what the donut economics basically is it downscales planetary boundaries and the social foundations, and each ring represents a safe and just space for humanity to be part of. So it's a translatable way to look at regeneration, And what I love most about it is the strategic coherence that you can find with it. Everything's a part of the same system, and we're all at different aspects, but we play for the same safe and just space. So, and also with Regen Sydney, we're grounded in this systemic design, but also with a mission. A question is, how can we convene courageous collaboration to transition Sydney to a life-affirming economy? So what does that even mean? How do we even put regeneration into practice? And given the small amount of time, I will share one of the pathways that we're doing with Regen Sydney, and that is through the Waverley program. So just a brief explanation that we did an amazing, Kieran is here in the room. Yeah, I can't take credit, but Kieran did an amazing and the team of convening and co-designing with the Waverley community of local businesses, policymakers, anchor institutions to put into context what the donut economics looks like for Waverley and their community. And they did that through 3 phases of portrait in place, measuring what matters, and a transition prototype. And all of this is very participatory, co-designing with the community. And it's just a reflection of what neighbourhood scale action looks like. And yeah, this is just for Waverley, but it can be a model for all the different neighbourhoods across Sydney. So also I will try to circle in food, but maybe it got lost in the presentation. But I will be now looking at what food can look like, and that's a cornerstone indicator of the Waverley community. What rose for them was they want a food system that is regenerative. And what does that even look like? What does a nourished food system look like for society and ecology? And I'll just share briefly what the yellow ones were, which is what really stood out for that specific community. It's building more local circular economies, like community gardens, reducing social disparities, like linking food to equitable housing, which I feel like is pretty timely for this conversation, and forming coalitions of businesses and organizations. So the food is just one lens of the donut economy for Waverley, but I think it's quite interesting for Regen Sydney, since we're already existing food system pathways. For the past year and a half, we've been convening food chats with Pocket City Farm, which is a peri-urban market garden in Annandale, right? Yeah. And these food chats are a way for us to do the radical collaboration that we're intending to do. We bring in unlikely alliances like the businesses and politicians to the farmers out in the regions, grounded in a specific topic. And our latest one coming, I'll be moderating with Pete, and it'll all be around strategy and resilience in the food system. But just going back to the Waverley, that's just what came up for them. And as this is a model that can be applied for different neighbourhoods, yeah, it's pretty transferable. And then going back to the bigger picture, that's just one of the pathways that we do with Regen Sydney. It's a very regeneration in practice. It's participatory, it brings in all the community and businesses. And we see Sydney as a living lab. So it's through the city-scale pilots and the regenerative neighbourhoods that we can demonstrate what regeneration can look like for the city. And yeah, it's a connective tissue of what the Sydney can look like if we were to go down the regenerative pathway. So since I'm leaving this panel off in an optimistic tone, I wanted to invite with an invitation on what can regeneration look like for your place? What might domain interests be? Is it food? Is it housing? And what opportunities do exist for you? So thanks for the opportunity.
up to the stage. Sit on the end. Okay, can you hear me? Yes. What fantastic presentations. I have so many questions, but I am going to start with the ones from you. Maybe, Emily, we start with you. You talked about enabling courageous collaboration to transition Sydney to a life-affirming economy. How do you think we can tell stories or get people engaged in that process to inspire more wildly ambitious regenerative projects?
Yeah, that's a good question, thank you. And thank you for the audience for asking that. Storytelling is a regenerative practice, and this is such a systemic problem that we're facing, and it can be quite not tangible, and storytelling really grounds what we're trying to do, and it brings in the lived experience and the place, which is what regeneration is all about. And I just want to briefly touch on intergenerationality. Storytelling honours history, and it brings in what presence, and it carries to the future and what stories we can have for the future. So I think if you want to start with storytelling, it's first what stories are out there. Yeah. And I also want to briefly touch on the story that I'm participating in with the Pathway to Purpose program at Digital Storytellers. I'm with a team and honouring the story of the Rushcutters Bay, and that's a very regenerative co-designing project that is, there's a lot to it, and there's so much history and complexity when it comes to that. And regeneration, with that lens, it really honours all the diverse perspectives that are a part of it. Yeah. And storytelling is a beautiful way to convey what we're trying to share. So storytelling does have a big impact with this work.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, while we're on intergenerational sort of perspectives, Louise, you talked about adaptive co-management structures and organisational forms that enable diverse stakeholders to input into a shared vision. So the question from the audience is, sustainable social capital requires long-term relationships. How can we slow down and give ourselves time to build and sustain multi and intergenerational communities in these developments?
Yeah, thanks. It's a great question. And it made me think of Bayo Akamalafi's quote, which is, "The times are urgent, let us slow down." And I think that there's this sort of air of urgency that often happens with development, and this air of inevitability that I think we really need to be pushing back on. And I mean, I kind of feel like it's an Alistair question as well, but it made me think of a couple of things. One being those examples that I showed, like Dudley Street, but also the London Community Land Trust, where they set up structures to start to activate sites before development and actually create a space, and particularly with regards to the sort of temporality that's in play here, where there's existing residents, there's past residents, there's future residents, and so creating spaces and structures where those people can come together, and also recognising that in most of these instances there's already people there and there's already social capital there, and recognising that and building on that. And so what was really nice about the London CLT was that they occupied the space and started activating a space that was slated for development, and used that as the vehicle for creating and amplifying the social capital that was on site, as a way to then start shaping the development discussions that were being held with regards to the future of the site. And that then translated into an agreement between the city, the development, and the community, and the creation of affordable housing designed according to community objectives. So we've got an issue here currently where our development, our participation options seem to be, we will come and tell you what's happening and you can notionally participate and we'll ignore you, through to you have to single-handedly reinterpret and reinvent the property system. You know, there's nothing in between. And what we see internationally is there is so much in between. And thinking about how we actually do that on a local basis in ways that make sense. There are ways to create shop fronts for councils where people could drop in after hours and actually input into a DA. So it's accessible, it works in terms of people's lives. It's not expecting people to somehow make a superhuman commitment above everything else they're doing in their lives. So it's really thinking about how we create spaces where the city or the state is accessible and it's in the infrastructure of people's lives in ways that they can interact with in meaningful ways. I could talk all day, but I was doing this.
And look, I think you're right. It is sort of tapping into what Alistair was talking about regeneration through a justice lens. So you may want to add to that, but there's also a question for you around, well, I've chosen to give it to you, but it's a hard question. Do you have a view on whether urban regeneration can happen without gentrification? And can gentrification occur without displacement? I'm hoping the answer is yes, Alistair.
It is a big question. I think the first, I mean, we have examples from Louise and others that, you know, the answer to the first question is yes, urban regeneration doesn't have to be led by a kind of system of market valuation. Whether gentrification can occur without displacement is a more difficult question to answer, and that kind of depends on what you think of as displacement. You know, the literature goes back decades on this, but we can think about displacement as either direct displacement, which is the kind of legal and economic compulsion for somebody to leave their home and community, or we can also think about displacement as indirect, and that's through the changes that occur at a more molecular level within a community that break down the kinds of social and community relations, cause social isolation, so that even somebody who has relatively secure housing doesn't feel like they belong in the community anymore. In that sense, I don't think gentrification almost definitionally can happen without displacement. So we need to be thinking about forms of urban regeneration that are not causing gentrification, and I think that's the real challenge.
Yeah. Interesting. I've got so many questions, but we've got like 10 minutes left. Caroline, loved your quote from Robin Wall Kimmerer, am I pronouncing that correctly, about how each of us can choose. The question I'm supposed to ask you is, what are the main principles for ensuring generation produces good urbanism? But I'm really interested in that sense of agency and how can we all respond to the challenge.
There's another book that I've read called, I think it's called What If? And it is a beautiful question to ask, because people keep going, oh, we can't do that because of blah, blah, blah. We can't do that. And you go, well, what if? What if you could? Let's just walk into that space and imagine it. And I think sometimes in doing that and abandoning all reality or the current reality and walking in and going, thinking, feeling, wondering what it might be, I think we can then start to go, wow, that's worth working for. How do we get there and then come back rather than trying to work out through all the difficulties to get there? And I just think that, you know, we get so caught in regulations and all sorts of things, some of which are necessary, many of which aren't. But I'm not in for this get rid of all regulation at the moment, because we've seen what that looks like and it's not great. But I just think that sometimes, you know, I was talking about the handprints to some students at Sydney Uni, and one of the international students said, well, how can you centre country and design in the middle of the city? And I said, great question. Let's think about that. Because country is always there, but what would it mean if we did? And that's it's not, these are not answers, they're questions, and they're all questions to have with a team of people who can then go, well, maybe it could be X, Y, Z, and then you go, well, actually we could do that. Yeah. So I think that it's about opening up possibility and finding ways for people to walk into that or feel into that and then get so excited that the demand builds and we go, yeah, we've got to do this.
Love it. Okay, I'm going to throw it over to you. I think we've got a roving mic. So anyone got a question? If not, I'm more than happy to. I've got thousands, so. Someone be brave. Yes.
Thank you very much for excellent presentation. Having sort of worked a bit in this planning space though, our biggest enemy at the moment is a government that's only focused on housing at almost any cost. And do you have any ideas on how to, we can reframe that conversation to make them understand that it's actually about what you're saying, building sort of living, thriving communities, not just housing boxes?
Do you want to have a go? Carolyn, or I was thinking maybe Louise.
Yeah, look, it's such a critical question, and I think it again, and Nicole, it's making me think of the paper you wrote with Peter about busy work and this sort of construction of crisis to generate noise and the appearance of action which doesn't address systemic issues. And I wish I knew the answer to your question. I think it's about having conversations around what it means to have a thriving city and what it means to actually have a city that is fit for the future. We've got things like the climate report that's come down. We've got the voting preferences of younger generations. We've got all of these levers that we can use to say it's not just pumping out housing. There are other ways to be thinking about the city, but I think we've just got to come at it from multiple angles and have these conversations at the local level as well and tell those stories of what we want places to be.
I think what the developers have been really good at over many years is planting their people in the ministers' offices, and really it's been a long-term strategy and they've been at it, and they now have the ear of all of those ministers, and that's all they hear. And I just think that what we need to do is galvanise the people to be writing in, ringing up and harassing their local members to say that is not what we want. There is a better way, there are better ways, and they're all different. Because that's, and I do think that there's an unbelievable amount of people doing and wanting better. They're just not connected, and they feel and think they are isolated, and we're not. And I just think that somehow one of the things we need to do is connect and enable people to have their voices heard by the politicians who elect them, to know that they want better.
Great. How are we going for time? Have I got time for one more question? Great. I've got one here.
Thank you so much. That last dialogue made me think. So I teach in a law school, and we produce lots of commercial lawyers, and we also produce people who want to go and work to public interest law and community legal centres. And there's a whole sector of that in the legal field. Where is the possibility for it? And I don't want to say that there isn't one. It seems to me, where would the public interest developers come from, or the non-profit real agencies, or real estate agencies, or the community building advice centres, or something? Is that a fantasy?
What if? No.
Well, I think international evidence shows us that it's not a fantasy. I mean, we see aligned entire non-profit development sectors, and we've got the community housing sector here as a growing entity in the space. But if you look internationally, there's aligned lending institutions, and we've got the community banks here. So it's really finding these things that do exist, and we've got the history of the cooperative housing societies, and we've had other ways of doing things previously in Australia. So it's rediscovering those and reinvigorating those, and finding the things that do have the potential for growth. I mean, the reason I've mentioned young people's voting interest is because not only is that something that politicians need to be paying attention to, but it is shaping the emergence of things like B Corp regulation and certification and ethical investment, and it's finding those and amplifying those and creating these auxiliary vehicles, so it's not just the real estate agents and the mortgage brokers and everyone who's in it to click the ticket as it goes past, and having a different value regime that's in play.
Yeah,
I don't know
it's
if
interesting
anyone else.
about, demonstrating what's possible and potentially piloting things here. And I think that sense of, well, it's being done somewhere else, so let's try it, or let's adapt it to suit our place is really interesting. And in some ways, Regenerative Sydney is having a crack at lots of different things across the city and trying to get people engaged, isn't it? All right, we might go to one more again.
Thank you. Just thinking about what if, and if we wanted to do some imagining, if you were to have a development site tomorrow and you each had one thing that you could include either in your consultation or that end built result that you think would make a big difference, what could that one thing be?
Oh, great question. Love it.
Not more pressure, but all the excitement.
Yeah.
I think the first thing you'd get is an integrated team of people to talk about that. And I think the first place you'd start is saying, what does country want here to really thrive? And then work from that.
I'll just go straight from this morning. I was at the Australian Museum for their coffee and chat, and our topic for this month was pollinators. And I'd say for your question, the first thing I thought of was a frog pond, because apparently it's very good for country. So yeah, just honouring what country wants, as Caroline was saying.
Yeah, look, there's a theme here. Hand the site back to the traditional owners and let them say what the place needs and embed that into everything that it does from there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a lot more to add to that, but I mean, maybe I'll give a boring and simple answer, which is that it should include low-cost, good quality rental housing and a tenant community of management.
Yeah.
And low-cost quality ownership and co-ops and food production and...
Yeah, and so many great ideas from the panel today. We are minutes away from the end, and I'm sure the panel members will hang around if you have other questions or ideas you want to talk to them about. But I mean, obviously there's a room full of people here who are interested in regenerative urbanism and potentially want to be part of how we take that forward. So I'm going to ask you, what's the one thing you want the people in this room to do? What's one thing they could start doing when they leave today that might move us towards regenerative urbanism?
You're looking at me.
Yeah.
No pressure. Good grief. Does anybody have something on the tip of their tongue? Because I don't know. I forgot about this question.
Do something. Just something that is relevant to you, that is different and can make a difference, and that you might help someone else do the same, and then kind of let it go, let it rip.
I do have an answer. So, I mean, getting involved in social movements that are actually directly addressing the kinds of issues that we're talking about here is the number one thing I think that anybody can do.
Yeah.
And that, it takes time and patience and a lot of failure, but I think that's really the one way to win.
Yeah, and adding to that, just the things that bring joy and that make joy, because the politics of like late capitalism or whatever we want to call it are dire and depressing and boring. So just embrace joy and carnival and creativity and play and messiness and all of those things that it's getting, blah, just like enough.
One thing that I love about Regen Sydney is the fact that we honour our place so much, and we do lots of walking in country. So I think what I'd love to share with the audience is to go out on a walk, have a walk even in the city. There's birds here, there's beautiful trees. Go to a national park if you can, and just really honour what we have, because we're very lucky to be here.
Oh, what a fantastic note to end on. I would really like to thank the panel, because I think you've heard from them, some really interesting critical perspectives, some really deep thinking about how we shift the way we do this, and also some great ideas about what else we could be doing, different approaches. So I'd really like to thank them for sharing that with us and answering all our questions so patiently.